Is there anyone else out there in their 40s like me who feels kind of invisible? Like, I'm not as cute as I was in my 20s and 30s. I'm definitely not as fit as I was in my 20s and 30s. I don't have as much hair as I used to have. It's literally falling off like the top of my head. Oh!
You do become a little more invisible the older you get as a woman, unfortunately. I don't get asked out on a lot of dates. I never get asked out on dates. I don't know if it's being 55 in Los Angeles or if it's just a strange town.
What is the biggest confidence killer for women over 50? Men over 50. They never look at you anymore.
When I was 55, I felt like I was starting to fade. I felt like I was starting to go invisible. I felt dismissed. I felt ignored. I felt like I was washed up.
When I was 15, I started modeling, and it was a very hard thing to walk away from. Then, around the age of 45, I started noticing that the way I was perceived was slightly different than what I had become used to. And then I would put photos of myself in bikinis. All of a sudden, I started getting the influx of, "Are you a little desperate there, Grandma? How about you cover up and spare us the look of your poor aging body?" I was sort of getting relinquished to the invisible women category.
Is there anyone?
So I think we've talked about this on, not we on this channel, but it's been talked about on social media again and again and again. There's a time limit for the game, right? In general, there's a time limit. This is not to say that there aren't some drop dead gorgeous women at 50, right? And I can attest to that. I know a few. I've seen a few. Social media has a bunch of them. So let's just set that aside. But in mass, what we're talking about, we have to make this, generalization that we're talking about in mass, you age out of the game, right? Just like men in the beginning of their careers, of the dating game career, they're kind of worthless. They've got maybe nearly unlimited stamina and a young back. But in terms of resource gathering, in terms of being a worthy sort of mate, they're all potential. They're all potential. And when men consider beauty as one of the fundamental things or first things they look for, as that fades as you get older, then that category becomes harder and harder for you to, sort of just hold on to. And before we continue on this one, guys, like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss new uploads. We're still trying to do 2 a day, and we're almost over with October, so we can put that one in the bank. Hopefully, cross your fingers. I'm gonna do my part. You guys do your part. Just tap it in, and little comments here and there, little likes, shares if you feel so inclined. So, aging, right? You women age out of the dating game because where men's attention typically lays first is with how you look. This is not to say that value is reduced, right? I think people's value is not simply in what they earn, or what they look like. I think there's more to people than that. But if we're keeping it here, when we're talking about beauty and women aging out, becoming sort of invisible to larger society, in the way they've always been accustomed to being visible. You were attracted, and that got you attention. Even if you were of average attraction, men still gave you that attraction. It was almost unlimited for such a long part, such a large swath of your life, that its absence, its sudden absence, is sort of like it's striking. When you suddenly go from being, I want to say just simply as something as, catcalled, but interest, eyes, heads turning, or people coming up when people, when men used to come up. When that is now reduced to you're just like every other person, I can get why that may be jarring. I can get why that may be sort of frightening for some. But when you don't simply hold all your value in the way you look, right, then you can sort of let that go gently, without that jar, without that, freaking out. When you know who you are, and you know your value you bring potential to relationships, you don't have to compete with your younger self or younger women. I think that's a fool's game, just as much as it's a fool's game for men to try and compete with older men. A 20-year-old man competing with a 40-year-old man in terms of resources, what we tend to it's from what we said to see and when things start going awry. Because in order for you to amass the sort of wealth that a 40-year-old man did, you're probably going to have to do not so legal things to compete on that level. You're going to start sacrificing potential years of your life, right? As in being locked up, just to compete as what a 40-year man did. One of the greatest pieces of advice I've ever heard about dating for young men, right? That was given to me by my father. Said, focus on your schoolwork. At the time, that's the last thing I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear, concrete, rules that I could live by that can get me what I'm trying to get. No, it was basically like, you got to eat ish for right now. Focus on your work, focus on becoming better than you are today. Then that'll come. If you make something of yourself and that is the purpose, that is the drive behind that, that'll come. So men have the ability to build themselves up to something that's more desirable for women, because women are saying, yeah, looks are important. So is, 1 through 17. Maybe you can't work on your looks as much as you might like, but you can shape yourself, you can sharpen yourself as much as possible. Height, yeah, you're stuck where you are. But these other things about being successful, being well traveled, being well spoken, right? Having these experiences in life, being a leader, you can work on these things indefinitely, right? So it's women give us, I don't say it's purposely, but in their desire, how they look and view men, you've got grace, you've got time to do these things. Women, not so much, because men, the first thing we're going to do is going to look at you physically and say, how do you appear? And if that's not to their liking, then it's harder for men to be incentivized to say, let me get to know her. That's why the majority of people meet, with friends or at work, because you have the opportunity to get more, to know more about this person outside of their looks, because you are in proximity to them, frequently. So you get to know more about the person. You get to see more of their personality. You get to see more of their value, and you start becoming intrigued. Say, oh wow, you do this, you do that. Oh wow, you're caring. That helps. So the purpose of this whole post is so we start thinking, as long as you stop trying to compete with your younger self, because you can't really get that magic back. That's something that's just simply time dependent. We're both running different races, and it seems almost the inverse of one another, men versus women, in terms of, yeah, we have time to become something that the best that we can be. And I don't want to make it seem like that's a simple process, because if you just look at the map, right, you look at who becomes actually viable, it's probably 10%, 10-20% become viable, right? Candidates are saying, yes, this is what women are actually interested in, what they're looking for, what actually drives them, the type of men they want to be in a relationship with. So it's a process, it's an arduous process. So is the result, the reverse for women. Going from being desirable, physically desirable, men wanting to say, okay, I want to get to know more about you, ideally. I want to get to know more about you. So I want to invest in you, time in you, paying for dates, phone calls, outings, whatever. They see the value in that, because first there's a physical component of that. When that becomes a fade, you still are valuable. It's just harder for men to initially want to see that, right? And then, yeah, if you want to call that a failing on men, that's fair, right? That's more than fair. I'll be the first in line to say, yeah, we have to eat that, but it's a biological imperative. We're not going to change that. Men they can try to legislate, they could try to talk like their way through that, but for the most part, that's how we're wired. So it's better to sort of accept that and know how, okay, I can still show some of my value. They can, as long as I get a chance to sit there in front of them and talk, they can see that I'm still worth it. I'm worth more than just physical looks. Ideally, that would be great, right? But what we see in our society, because we have such a focus on the physical, we have such a focus on trying to capture that thing of the past, that we will go under the knife, we will take risky procedures to just become more desirable for the opposite sex. The ones women undergo is obvious, right? But then men, we're we're lengthening our bones to try to walk awkwardly for the rest of our lives, so we can go from being 5'8" to 6'2", right? That's how important it is for people to be attractive to one another. We're both in this together, and we both can, if we have a little bit more sense, we can see like there's still value in, short men, ugly men, and older women. It's not something that we should just use to automatically disqualify ourselves. But in that sense, you know, this should be a good idea, a good reason why we should all just take care of ourselves physically, right? Be as pretty as possible, be as handsome as possible, right? Take it upon yourself to learn some sort of style, to bring that up, but do that along with everything else, right? All the other, fundamental things in you, your personality, your spirit, those things should be just as important or more so than just how you physically look. But to ignore the physicality, I think you'll find yourself sort of jarred off the edge. Just the same way, if a man that leads with his wallet is suddenly broke, suddenly poor, his world is upside down. So prevent that. You know, try to divorce yourself from the value that you think is most important, just your physical looks or how much money is in your wallet. I dare say be a good person, right? Work on that. Imagine that. But listen, if you agree with me, disagree, let me know. You see any videos on your screen? Take a look at those. Let me know what you think about those as well. And if you listen to my voice, you haven't subscribed. All right. Subscribe on the next one. All right. It'll be here tomorrow. I'll see you guys on the next one.